Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. Take a break from our positional reviews to go through what has been a flurry of Ravens coaching changes over the last few days. Joining me to do that is Alec Poulianos. Alec, how you doing?
Doing good, Ken. So happy to see that Monken got extended.
It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. I didn't have a lot of fear that he was going to be signed somewhere else. So I thought the chance is pretty good that he'll be extended here. But codifying that seems like a big deal. I still think probably, even though I believe he was signed through this year anyway, he probably will have written into that contract the right to interview with other teams. Not that the Ravens tend to refuse that, but I think that would be the expectation, is that if he gets a head coaching offer next year, that he'd certainly be able to take it.
Agreed.
Many positive facets from a play and scheme perspective, I think, go through this. But what are your biggest takeaways from Monken's first 2 years here?
He was really able to take what was great about Roman's offense and bring it to the next level with the passing concepts. One of the things I really applaud him is his sequencing of plays and his ability to kind of set up, plays down the line. Monken is when we got him from Georgia, he was well known for adapting his offensive scheme to the personnel that he has, and I think we've seen that. For instance, you go get Derrick Henry, you got a guy like Valele playing guard, and they kind of adapted their scheme to make the most of those guys. A little bit more zone running, for instance, and I just definitely think that is something that's so special about him. Love his style. He always appealed to me as an orator at the stand, and also just the way that you saw him coach in any of the clips that you see come out of camp or Hard Knocks and things of that nature. Just a really dynamic personality, and one of those guys that kind of makes me wonder if he might be kind of like Spags, where he doesn't get a head coaching chance, is a little bit older, and just can stick around for a while here, and that'd be so wonderful. Because I think you need it. The continuity is so key. You always see year 1 to 2 a big jump, and you thought to yourself, well, year 1 we had an MVP quarterback and like pretty good results. Like obviously we had expectations of it getting better, but they were met and in my opinion exceeded. So just really a tremendous job, great work, and very happy to see him around.
Yeah, I think Lamar is more likely than not, substantially more likely than not, I would say, to win the MVP award again here. And Monken's 2 seasons being Lamar MVP seasons is really saying something in terms of the quality of the hire. You definitely don't get any indication that the two of them have any sandpaper-y kind of a relationship in terms of friction happening. And that was true pretty much of every coordinator under Flacco for a long period of time. Kubiak might have been the exception, but Cameron, you occasionally hear him going, "Yes, Cam," kind of thing. And you don't want to, you just don't want to have that kind of relationship between your quarterback and the offensive coordinator. Mark Trestman, I don't think, he was supposed to be kind of a quarterback whisperer and whatnot, but I don't think he really ever got that relationship with Flacco down.
No,
he's honestly, Trestman just struck me as being very weird, very weird.
Yeah, I agree.
So, continuity, I thought, has been great, and continuity of scheme is a lot of what I'm talking about. Obviously, they've had some discontinuity on the offensive line they've dealt with very effectively, but and when they've had discontinuity, their receiving group this year, maybe even that's the most impressive thing, is be able to be without Zay Flowers at a very key time of the year and be able to win what did they win? 2 ball games. They lost him in the final game of the year against Cleveland, right? And then they didn't have him for either playoff games. They won the Cleveland game, which they had to win, obviously, without him for some of it. And then they won the first postseason game against Pittsburgh, which is always a nice one. And then they were very competitive, obviously, against the Bills without him.
Truly. It was really impressive to see the Anthony Miller, Sims plug-and-play situation that they did to get a lot of the same production. Was one of those kind of things we kind of talked about in our offensive line show, of how maybe there are places that you can save money on this team. Wide receiver being one of them. The way that Miller was able to come in and produce, like obviously you don't want to lean on that forever, but that was promising. The ability just to get replacement level play given the structure of the offense and the other focuses. You have to still focus on Henry. You have to focus on Lamar. You have to focus on Andrews and Likely and Bateman. So you're able to maybe make some of those efficiencies there. So yeah, like you said though, the ability to adjust losing your Pro Bowl wide receiver and still have enough offensive production, in my opinion, that wasn't the reason they lost the game.
Yeah, no, I would agree. They distributed the football very well throughout the season. And I think that you got to give Monken some of the credit for it, and you got to give obviously Lamar a lot of the credit for it in terms of just his growth of a quarterback. But there are many more players on extended plays he's looking for. I think one of the biggest pieces of evidence in this is in the use of the tight ends and how the number of targets to tight ends got reduced. I did talk about this on another show. So if you're listening to this for a second time, I'm sorry about it, but tight end targets went from 195 in 2022. They used extremely heavy offense under Greg Roman to 110 in 2023. But the big difference is the passer rating throwing two tight ends went up north of 140 in 2023 when the Ravens had their great all-around year. And it was the first year of really a lot of good distribution of the football, particularly on extended plays. It's not just Mark Andrews is the Lamar Jackson automatic bailout guy, which if you can have multiple options there, it's always better to do that. Then in 24, targets go up for the tight ends from 110 to 138. But guess what? The passer rating didn't go down. It still stayed over 140. I think it was 140.3 or something this year. I said it on another show.
It's absurd.
What it was exactly. It's just unbelievable. It's got to be the greatest 2-year period of throwing to tight ends that the NFL has ever seen, and by one team, and just ridiculous. Over that period of time, by the way, that is this year, 18 touchdowns, 1 interception thrown to the tight ends, 106 out of 138 passing. I just think about that for a second. That's over 75% complete, and 1,281 yards, and there it is, 141.3 rating.
It's unbelievable. And kudos to Monken for being able to do that. That's what we wanted when we brought him in. We saw the two tight ends. We thought that was a place to attack and get better, and they've done it. We had complaints maybe in 23 that they weren't using both of them at the same time as much as we wanted, but they figured out a way to do that a little bit more this year, and they benefited from it.
Had some injuries, honestly, they're dealing with in 23 at the tight end position that made it more difficult. This year, it was a little bit easier to have everybody available. Kolar, was a big loss, but they didn't throw the ball to Kolar too much in either season. It was mostly having Kolar as an inline blocker, which with the passing options were still largely open. The people who say now it's an 11 personnel league, it's a passing league, you have to pass first. You can't do it the way the Ravens are doing it. They better be seriously eating some crow right now over that theory. This is just not. That's not a modern. The modern NFL offense now is a hybrid run pass offense.
Correct. Yeah, they're not watching the playoffs. If you think that.
Yeah. How about Monken on scripted plays? Because that I thought was always a great strength of Monken, particularly this year.
Yeah, the opening drives were always quite good. Sometimes just unbelievably good. I will admit I was very confident after the opening drive against Buffalo. Now, granted, we never punted, so I guess that confidence maybe wasn't the worst. But I kind of felt like we did the thing. I was like, oh yeah, this is going exactly according to plan. I think he schemed it up well, and what does that do for you? Hopefully you get points, obviously, but it sets you up so nicely, right? Scoring on the opening drive can really have some trickle-down effects of maybe you double up, suddenly you're up by 2 scores. That might impact the way that they approach you, makes your defense better to complementary football. Engine goes burr, and then you're just really happy. So I think that's an underrated maybe component of his game.
So certainly the way the Chiefs got the Ravens off their spot in the AFC Championship game in 23 was by getting ahead with scores on the first 2 drives. Ravens answered on the first one. They didn't answer on the second one. And then, the total carries by the running backs were low in that game. And that was a constant problem. Anyway, real happy with the Mockett extension, but we have some others to talk about. Chuck Pagano hired as a senior secondary coach. The team has a secondary coach who is also an assistant head coach in Chris Hewitt. So the title senior secondary coach probably didn't sit as well with Chris Hewitt. But before we get into Chris Hewitt's reaction to this thing, let's talk about Chuck Pagano generally. 64, not a head coaching candidate. I would suspect, part of the discussion between him and John was coming in to be a mentor as opposed to coming in to really run the whole thing as it is right now. I mean, a big part of it has to be as a mentor.
Yeah, for sure. Allegedly, he was on the Pat McAfee show explaining why he's coming back after his time away. It's been on the back of his mind. It had to be a perfect situation, and he thought, his familiarity with the Ravens and his respect from top to down with the team is why he wanted to come back. Obviously, Pagano, I think, is well loved and remembered by this town. So no reason to... The fan reaction was very positive, in my opinion, from what I could see, to bring him back. And, you just think about it. It's kind of interesting what they're doing here. You get Orr as the defensive coordinator. You bring in Pease to help him out. He's still going to be around this year, but in a smaller role. Now you bring in Pagano. You're kind of bringing some of the greatest hits almost, of coordinators that are still maybe around to grow this guy and make him, a high quality defensive coordinator. I left the season pretty confident in Orr's ability to be a defensive coordinator and coach in this league. I kind of said it from the moment he was hired. It wouldn't shock me if he's a part of this Harbaugh succession plan, as maybe a potential. You stick around here, you keep doing well, and you might be the head coach here one day, kind of thing. So yeah, it just it's cool that they're doing this because he didn't have the same experience as McDonald to be able to go and call plays the first year over in Michigan and kind of get that. So they're doing it maybe a little bit of a different approach, bringing in these vets, these old defensive coordinators. So
creativity and adaptability of style, which we've seen from Harbaugh, I think, in coaching hires, is one of the hallmarks of really good leadership. It's something that you need to not have only one way of getting a personnel problem solved. It's incredibly valuable in business. I mean, it comes up all the time. And I just to see how he's addressed this. And Ravens, frankly, they're fine hiring over, under, beside, retitalizing people. Think back to even Jim Fossil coming in to call plays for Brian Billick. And it didn't work out in the end, but I think it was Billick's choice to make that hire. He wanted to hire Fossil as an assistant offensive coordinator, and then he had to fire Fossil at midseason because he thought he was going to cost him his job.
Yeah, that's not something we're seeing out of how Harbaugh's been hiring. I think he was never afraid of losing his job. And he wanted to have just the best people around him, and that like you mentioned, in any industry, that's the way to be. Yeah. It's a loser and failing mentality otherwise. So
intellectual security, very important.
Yep. And I mean, you look at it too. You have Pagano coming in to an unbelievable situation. The secondary is the strength of this team in many ways. You've got Marlon, who we hope is back next year. You've got Wiggins and obviously Hamilton, maybe Ardarius. Just really like a great core there to coach, and he'll be able to help develop those players even more so. And he kind of mentioned in the interview, and Harbaugh's been saying this for years, is like the defense hasn't really changed much. It goes through these evolutions, it goes through different flavors, but the core defense we've been running in Baltimore is pretty consistent year over year.
they certainly haven't changed like 4-3 to 3-4 at any point since. I want to say the last time they were a 4-3 defense is 2001. I don't think they've done it since then. So, they've been very set in terms of how things done. They've been at times they've been a committed nickel or a dime team, but that's one specific position and how you're dealing with it. I don't think Harbaugh is really talking about that. That would be the flavor. Anyway, but I think brings a lot to this position. Hopefully we'll find the next guy and mentor him, and however Chuck wants to coach, however long he can coach, great. And hopefully he can be an asset to Orr and be an asset to overall communication between the secondary and other members of the defense, for example.
For sure. It's interesting. Apparently the way this marriage happened was Pagano reached out to Harbaugh to advocate for a different coach. And after that conversation, he was like, are you interested in coaching at all? And kind of like he said, it came out of left field. He wasn't really thinking about it, but then, he thought about it and he decided that's what he wanted to do. So very interesting. It's one of those things where it seems like Pagano might have been caught off guard, but I wonder how much it was top of mind for Harbaugh. Like how serendipitous was this and how deliberate was it?
Right. Well, let's talk about Chris Hewitt a little bit because he's affected by this change, and the Ravens, he agreed to mutually part ways today, which was a little surprising that happened, but not completely shocking when you think about what might have been the origin. But why don't you take us through his history as a coach, if you want to do that?
Sure. So Chris Hewitt, he's still listed on the Ravens coaching page, and Pagano's still there too, so it's kind of weird. But let me. It seems like I just went off.
I've got it up in front of me if you want me to do it.
Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry, I must have closed
it
out.
He played in the league for the Saints between 97 and 99. Obviously, he probably wasn't sure he was done playing at that point. Didn't start coaching until Notre Dame in 2003 when he was a strength and conditioning coach, assistant. Went to Rutgers and was a running backs and cornerbacks coach. That's an odd combination, but that's what he was doing. Mm-hmm. Spent 8 years there coaching those two units. Came to the Ravens in 2012. So we're already talking about a guy who's been with John Harbaugh for 13 seasons now. Yep. During 2012 to 19, he was a defensive backs coach. In 20 and 21, he became pass defense coordinator. This is creative titling here is great here. 22 and 23 is the pass game coordinator and secondary coach. And then 24, and I think that means pass defense, but I'm not 100% sure that's true because I thought that T. Martin would have been the guy on the offense who was doing that. And then in 24, he was assistant head coach, pass game coordinator, and secondary coach. So Harbaugh thought highly of him. He's had interviews for defensive coordinator positions, at least one. I don't know if he was really thought of as being a future head coach, which might have figured into the calculus in terms of what happened. But what do you see in that record? What sticks out to you?
Obviously, he was a member of the Ravens for a very long time. You might be wondering, how did he get his start with the Ravens? It turns out that Harbaugh was his coach at age 17 at University of Cincinnati. Huh. So there's always a path, right? There's always a path to how they know these guys. And one thing I wanted to kind of mention on the side, one of the things I might think that why Harbaugh might be good at this coaching hire thing, I didn't realize it, but apparently a lot of these coaches are hired based off the agents. They had similar agents with the other coaches. I don't know if Harbaugh does that. I don't know anything about his agency or not. It feels like he might just hire people, but maybe I'm completely off base and it's the same thing. But maybe he goes against that market friction.
It's a facilitated interview process we're talking about now. So you have somebody who's in the office and they go to church with somebody and they bring in their resume to ask somebody else to take a look at it. There certainly is stuff like that going on with every job hire in the United States.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I know. But I guess what I'm like, for instance, McDonald, apparently that's what happened with him is he gets hired as head coach. Later in the game, he goes to his, agent. He's like, oh, we got this guy, this guy, this guy. He fills it in. And then this year he's kind of cleaning house and doing it fresh. But yeah, anyways, very interesting to see him. He was very stagnant. You don't normally see guys at a coaching position for so long as defensive back coach. I guess sometimes you do, but I guess it seems like a lot of these guys either start moving up or disappear. You know what I mean? And he did eventually move up. And it's just interesting as he gets that additional title of assistant head coach in 24, and now is gone. So kind of two major things to fill.
Yeah, I mean, the assistant head coach thing, the Ravens have more than one. Randy Brown, I believe, has that title as well. And I have to look. No, I got Randy Brown, the politician here. I'd bring up that. I really want to look at Randy Brown, the kicking coach. But anyway, I believe Randy Brown also has that. And he's always kind of standing close to Harbaugh and going around and he's got his legs spread like he's very intent on the game. And, we think of him as a kicking coach. He's a guy who, I guess his title here is senior special teams coach, but I thought he was assistant head coach too. All right. Yeah. What do I know?
And then we have an assistant to the head coach. It's a different person entirely.
Assistant to the head coach. Yes. That's like the head coach's secretary, I think. One guy who had that job a long time ago, it's not like it's an unimportant position. It's a very coveted position. Matt Weiss, I think that might've been his first job coming out of Yale to be Harbaugh's basically secretary. And he held that job for, I want to say, a couple of years, and then he moved up in the organization and became an on-field coach, including I think cornerbacks one year for the Ravens. So it's like, quite a move to make that kind of career shift.
Yep. Now it's Megan Rosberg. So we'll see what she does.
All right. What else to say? Now, I think with you, I think there are a lot of potential reasons why the Ravens and he mutually parted ways, and we can speculate on these. I just lay them out as possibilities of why it occurred, but there certainly could have been something that went on during the season in terms of a lack of accord with Orr. Might have been part of the problem. That they could have had things they didn't agree on. The thing that came to mind for me first was that Hewitt was backing the current safeties, and Harbaugh or others, maybe Orr, were not. And then when they finally decided to get rid of the safeties and, hey, wait a minute, the problem's completely solved, and all of a sudden the Ravens had the best pass defense in the league, then that became kind of a big millstone around Hewitt's neck for him to carry. I'm not saying that's definitely the case. I think that is a possibility. And if he was defending Eddie Jackson or defending Marcus Williams' behavior during the season, is probably not going to be a winning strategy when they're both out the door.
Certainly, and he might have also felt undermined even earlier in the year with the Pease acquisition. It's unclear exactly what Pease did, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he was a big part of that secondary change as well. And maybe that, Chris just felt like, I thought my responsibility was pass game coordinator, and you could see that maybe he got blocked out a bit. And then particularly the Chuck Pagano signing. I didn't realize that these things were sequenced the way they were. I'm curious if Hewitt was already leaving at that point. You know what I mean? Like I'm curious exactly how. I'm curious how it's all sequenced, right? I know it all came out today, but who knows?
Let me give you one possible way that could certainly be true. Is Hewitt maybe in the last year of his deal in 25, and his current deal, it may have an extension that goes even through 26. But let's say for a second his deal was up in 25. He might have been going to the Ravens and saying, "Look, I want a little more security than this. I've been here for 13 years. Can you extend me for 3 more, or for 2 more seasons, or even 1 more, such that I can, at least know I'm going to be with these same guys and coaching these guys in 2026, and I'm not going to be looking for a job next offseason." And neither the Ravens nor Chris Hewitt would want that. In fact, Wink Martindale, when he left, exact same situation. He was signed for one more year, but they mutually agreed to part ways. And I do believe it was mutual because the Ravens would not extend him, and Wink didn't want to stay here coaching on a 1-year deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable. It's interesting. I was thinking about it today. I don't know if these contracts are really well reported. Obviously head coaches are decently well reported, but it all comes back to like going back to old news articles, right? In order to figure out like how many years are left on so and so's contract. You don't really have as many specifics, I guess, because it doesn't get accounted to the cap. It doesn't need to be advertised that way.
Right, and we wouldn't know the important details anyway. Like right. you might know that you got, well, they've given me guarantees through X and Y and Z, but they can buy me out for whatever. All of that extra crap you wouldn't ever know. It's like any kind of management contracts out there in the business world. There could be a lot of things, and that's why severance packages exist. Anyway. What his departure does do is allow the Ravens the freedom, I think, to identify a young coach for the defensive backs that can be part of a succession plan leading up at least as high as defensive coordinator. And I specifically mentioned that because I don't want the Ravens to shoot any lower than that. I'd love to have a head coaching candidate, guy who's a 5-star generalized coaching candidate plugged in to a assistant DB role to start with, who's 26 or 28 years old and is a guy you're going to bring along very quickly. Or maybe he's 30 and he is already a pretty good college resume, but he hasn't been able to break into the pro ranks yet. Bring him in this position, have Pagano mentor him to become a great head coach. But I want leader of men. I want some apparent head coaching characteristics. I probably, all other things being equal, I want a minority guy who the Ravens can potentially get the additional juice for in the formula if he leaves to go somewhere else. So you at least win if you lose, win if you stay kind of situation, as opposed to you wouldn't get that with a Monken if he were to leave the position.
Of course, and I think it might just be another like classic inefficiency, right? The reason that the Rooney Rule exists is because they want more opportunities for African American and minority coaches to have opportunity in the league, and it just by definition suggests that they're not getting adequate attention, and like the talent's probably there and just not the opportunity. So like, it could just be a nice way to find good coaches, right? So I definitely hope that they keep going down that route as well. Obviously, you want to hire the best person, but like, yeah.
Whether or not they have accomplished everything they wanted to, I don't think there's a question that there's more white coaches than there are white players in the league at this point still. But whether or not they're going that, at least you have to say they're on the right track with this. I mean, if people like me are saying this is an important consideration when you're going out to get a coach, is to try and get an outstanding young African-American coach to be a potential head coach of the future and get the gains that exist under the system for that. I mean, you can bet that Eric DeCosta is all on top of that too. And other people are, even though it's not DeCosta's hire to make, are chirping in the ear of John Harbaugh to make such hires.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think there's a lot of reasonable pushback about the way the rules set up right now with the in-person interviews, and you have these like token interviews. You have people traveling just for no reason and all that. But it definitely seems to be helping at the lower levels of coaching, up to even coordinators, right? So we'll see how it progresses over the years and if there's any tweaks to the system. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely an advantage. Draft picks are good, so all things being equal, you would love to get that extra juice.
All right, well, let's move on and talk about the Travell Wharton situation a little bit, because an odd situation with him, a little bit odd from my perspective. And he hasn't moved on as far as I know anyway yet. But the Ravens hired over him last year, and at the last moment, because Joe D was left for medical leave basically immediately. They had just a handout for us at camp saying George Warhop's been hired, and here's some of his background and whatnot. And he'd been out of football, I think, for 1 year Warhop had, but Travell Wharton had already been the offensive line coach with the Commanders the previous year, and he'd been an assistant offensive line coach in the NFL for total offensive line coaching for 6 years, from 2018 to 2023. So a little surprising that he didn't just get the job right away. And we were unsure about things for a few days when Joe D wasn't at camp, and he'd been unusually absent. There was suspicion that there might be medical issues involved, and Travell seemed to be doing a pretty good job of leading offensive line practices during that time. But for whatever reason, they obviously didn't consider him ready to lead the Ravens unit.
Right. I mean, you look at it, he had 1 year of offensive line coaching, no assistant title. 43 years old. Warhop, on the other hand, 28 years of experience. It's not completely crazy. At the same time, though, 8 years of experience, and Orr suddenly our defensive coordinator, right? So, I'm not saying that these years of experience are the only thing. I don't think it's crazy. One thing we talked about earlier is that Mike Devlin left, and he was the Ravens' assistant offensive line coach for a while. He's now the offensive line coach at the Chargers, so perhaps he would have been a guy that they felt confident promoting, and they just got caught, flat-footed a bit because he just got to the Ravens in 24. It was his first year with the Ravens as an assistant offensive line coach, and maybe they just didn't have that level of confidence, right? So it's not too crazy. It might have been one of those things where I can't remember exactly the story of Warhop's availability, but it might have been one of those things too that Warhop wanted to be a no assistant, offensive line coach, and that's one of the reasons that.
Oh, I don't doubt that's true, but the Ravens had to make a decision very quickly to bring in a guy who no doubt has all the technical experience you could want in terms of offensive line coaching.
Yeah, so he had been offensive line coach, no adjective for since before I was born. So he's been doing this for over 30 years in the college ranks as well, right?
Yeah. Anyway, outstanding pickup for the Ravens on very short notice, and I think we'd have to say it was a big success this year as they ran for over 3,000 yards again, passed for over 4,000 and 6.8 yards per play. Most of that's Lamar Jackson, but George Warhop undeniably improved the offensive line play as the year went on. Now he was also in charge early in the year when they were accumulating a bunch of penalties, but the penalties went away at several of the offensive line positions for about the last 8 or 9 games of the year.
Wow. I'm looking at Warhop's series of jobs, and his last job before the Ravens was in 22, which is a 1-year gig as the offensive line coach for the Texans, who, by the way, it seems like they just churn through offensive line coaches every year. So they're really struggling there.
Yeah. Anyway, whether Travell Wharton is the Ravens' greatest next great offensive line coach, I really don't know. He is, I think, young enough to do it, so he's still only 43 years old.
Right.
But if he's not the guy, the Ravens ought not leave him dangling on the line for very long, and they ought to part ways at the appropriate time and find the guy who is. And that's really what I hope they would do this offseason. Is Warhop's obviously not here forever. If Wharton's the guy, great, go with him. If it's somebody else, then go ahead and tell Wharton, it's time to part ways and find the guy who is. And I want that resolved, and don't really care, who they go, whether they go college or pro ranks to get that guy. But I definitely want that. And in the case of an offensive line coach, by the way, I don't know how you feel about this. I'd rather have a guy who just wants to coach offensive line for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I feel like that's the mold. I think you look at offensive line coaches, they don't really, that's not usually where the next offensive coordinator comes from. So yeah, I think for sure, that's what you want. And, that has proven historically to be the best offensive line coach is what they do. I think the offensive line coach at, the Steelers has been there forever, for instance, if I recall correctly. I think it's something I saw in Hard Knocks. So,
okay. All right. Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
They made one other change in the last week or so, letting De Leone go, the inside linebackers coach.
Oh yeah, I saw
difficult year for the inside linebackers. Not a complete surprise that they would move on at the inside linebacker position. And I don't know if they hired somebody internally because I haven't heard of a hire yet.
Yeah, I haven't heard that either. I misspoke about the offensive line coach for Steelers, by the way. He's only been there for 2 years. But he has been offensive line coach for a while. Like I said, they tend to stay there, like you said. Yeah, I saw that inside linebacker move. It seems like that's where they're trying to open up positions to, churn through, I guess, younger guys to see where the next, great talent might be. And I think that's reasonable. You look at Orr being the defensive coordinator, I think you have a lot of linebacker acumen, and then you have a guy like Roquan who's almost a coach on the field too. So I think it's one of those things where that might be a good place to not experiment, but try to find the right guy.
Okay, I hear you there. So you're saying that guy could end up being a wide receivers coach or a tight ends coach or a cornerbacks coach the next year, but you're bringing him and an assistant inside linebackers coach.
I guess I wasn't thinking that way, but I do think there's a pretty clear institutional knowledge strength there that you could put a guy there that you just want to develop, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, maybe it's like a well insulated position group.
That is a very good point, and I think that is a hiring strategy they could use. It's like where can we stick a guy who we think has a lot of talent, but does not necessarily have experience at that position group.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very good point. All right. Well, this is a pleasure talking about you. Do you get the impression that the Ravens are done in terms of their coaching moves for this year?
Interesting question. I would say no, for no other reason than we're not the NFL is not done poaching people. Some of these offensive or head coaches just got hired a couple of days ago. They're trying to fill out their staff. While these guys don't have necessarily ties to the Ravens, it wouldn't be shocking for them to want to poach
Chuck Smith or something like that.
Yeah, historically good, team who's just obviously has good coaches, and the Harbaugh tree is undeniable when it comes to coaching talent throughout the league. So there could be movements made. I don't know who those people are off the top of my head. I feel like we're relatively safe. Maybe a guy like T. Martin could be taken. I don't know. But yeah, I think I would say there's going to be movement for no other reason than probably someone goes somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's where I am as well. Maybe not exactly for the same reasons, but I just think the Ravens have this great history of bringing in a guy and then making up the position for him, kind of like what they apparently did with Pagano. You wonder about the sequence of events. You're 100% right that it may have been they knew Hewitt was not going to be happy when they told him they weren't going to extend his contract, or they had, and he expressed displeasure, and they said, we better just hire another senior assistant to make sure we know what we're doing here. And they go ahead and they hire Pagano at this title that seems like it might be above him, and then that kicks the can out the door in this case.
If you want to do some more psychoanalysis here, right? In that article, they said Pagano was calling about another guy to Harbaugh, another coach, and it could be for that inside linebacker job, right? That just opened up. So maybe it's where it started, and they still haven't hired that guy. So maybe that still happens, right? So I do think there's going to be some more moves, even on that front.
Yeah, I'd say if I had to tag a number on it, maybe you can think of one too. I'd say 75% the Ravens make another move before OTAs start.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. All right. Always a pleasure talking football with you, Alec. Tell folks where they can contact you online if they want to talk football with you or tag you into a conversation.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Twitter at @Polianis and Blue Sky, alec.polianis.com. And feel free to tag me into conversations and talk football. Always a pleasure.
All right. Other folks out there, if you have topics for film study shorts, hit me up. Thank you for all the extremely loyal listeners. We appreciate you. I can't even say. Been another great season of doing these pods. We've seen the numbers. We're very happy. Please tell another friend. As always, if you're out on YouTube listening to this, like and subscribe. And as always, we depend on word of mouth to get this out. We're not really algorithm astute here enough to get it done that way. But I do appreciate all the listens. Alec, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Ken.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.